had to break with the past. It had to break with the past because even the socialists, the Yiddish, the Bundists, who came deeply imbued with their deep feeling for things Jewish, found it necessary, because they were working in workshops where there were non-Jewish workers, they had to learn to speak English. If travelling on a bus, no good asking a conductor for a distance in Yiddish he wouldn't understand, so they had willy-nilly to have to learn English. And so the logic of this change occurred also in the life of the workers' circle. I recollect, as an illustration of the kind of things that used to happen, meetings of the Central Committee. I used to have to take the minutes of the meetings of the Central Committee, and the proceedings would take place in two languages. You'd have some people get up and speak in Yiddish, other people would get up and speak in English, and sometimes they would break from Yiddish into English and from English into Yiddish. And if you're taking minutes of proceedings, I recollect, I've still got some of these notebooks of mine where I noticed a particular word used by somebody which I wasn't exactly certain of its meaning in English. I'd put it down in German, because this was the nearest approach to Yiddish I could write at the time, and at the first opportunity I would get, I would look up the German translation to make certain I got the exact meaning of this word. Well, this symbolized the change in the thinking and the change in the way in which people were behaving inside the workers' circle. And so English became the means of communication and the means of expression for people in the circle. Now, at that period, we had people like Dr. Baru, Natani, Barnett Weinberg, Borovic, Eisenstone, Pilchik, Sandrine, Nathan Kramer. All these people were giants in their own way. Giants. When you consider what East London produces today, or what the Jewish community produces today, you will realize how much has been lost from our communal life by the fact that certain social changes have occurred in the life of the Jewish people in East London. There was a period when it was felt that we ought to widen the cultural sphere and the cultural life of the workers' circle. And due to the activities of two younger members of the circle, they decided to try and develop a series of concerts. Not concerts in the general sense as we understand it by somebody giving a turn, but classical music concerts. And they opened with a concert, and I can't recollect the name of the person who first performed, in this hall in Ailey Street. And when the concert was taking place, you know, the habit of going to concerts was not very well developed. And the organisers just didn't know what to expect. And they had an artist performing, playing the piano, I think it was, and the audience that came there with peanuts, oranges, and cracking peanuts and talking to each other. And you imagine the situation when here's an artist comes down from probably West London to play to the poor of East London, and this is the way people were behaving. Well, the organisers almost tore their hair out. They were used to going to concerts and knowing what it was like to be at a concert, and they didn't know what to do. And so they thought of the idea that instead of having a hall lighted when an artist comes on, they will put the lights out and just have the stage lights on and see what would happen. And it's an astonishing thing that when the lights went out, the people behaved themselves. I don't know why it is. They didn't crack peanuts, and they didn't peel orange, and they didn't talk.
Because they couldn't see.
No. Reason. However, the interesting thing is this, that in a very short time, the people who came because it was a cheap occasion to spend an evening, or were used to coming to the workers' circle, mit probieren, you know, the kind of thing, they went in to see, they fell away. And these concerts then began to attract an entirely new type of person, the young people. You know how we always complain, nobody's got the young people. Well, those days in the workers' circle in the early 30s, these concerts attracted young people by the 100. And it became literally a case of first come, first served. If you didn't get to a concert a half an hour before it started, you couldn't get in. And what did they charge? Sixpence. And for sixpence you had artists like Solomon, Camperley, the Grilla Quartet, Ida Handel, famous singers Henry Wendon, Eileen Joyce, people whose names are world famous names. These artists would come down to East London to play, and in a very short time these concerts assumed a reputation equal to the concerts that were held at Wigmore Hall, and it would be regularly featured in the musical column of the important Sunday papers. This was the sort of thing that the Circle undertook in those days in the 30s. Then, of course, we came to the period of the rise of fascism. With the advent of Hitler fascism, a turn occurred in the social life and the political thinking of Jewish people in East London. There had already been some understanding of what fascism was, Mussolini brand of fascism before, but it hadn't yet made an impact on the thinking of Jewish people in East London. But when Hitler's Nazism came to power in Germany in the 30s, early 30s, things began to move. And the general activity developed around this question of persecution of the Jews and what ought we to do about it. Well, those days in the Workers' Circle, there were a group of Bundists, Mindel was among them particularly, who was very keen on what was described those days as a Jewish Labour Council. This was an organisation consisting of representatives of the trade unions in East London, of the Workers' Circle, and of one or two Landsmannschaften which were closely linked with the Workers' Circle. And this Jewish Labour Council called a meeting one day of its delegates and asked what was to happen on this question of the rise of fascism in Germany and the beginnings of the fascist movement in this country. And so a conference was decided upon that first of all an approach had to be made to the Board of Deputies of British Jews. Remember, the Workers' Circle, because its background and position, would have nothing to do with Anglo-Jewry in the official sense. This was possible for them. They couldn't, bourgeois Jewry, the Swaylings, the Samuels, the Whaley Cohens, these were Jews with whom Jewish workers had no contact, and the only approach there was between Jewish workers and these, the Daracha, was charity. And charity for the Workers' Circle was poison, anathema, and they wouldn't have anything to do with them. But when it came to a question of the rise of anti-Semitism in this country, the question was asked, what ought the Board of Deputies, as the spokesman for British Jewry, do about this question of the rise of fascism and anti-Semitism? And we sent a delegation to the Board of Deputies to ask them to arrange for Jewish defence in the form that was necessary. This was turned down, and I remember taking part in the negotiations at the time, and we could get very little satisfaction from the representatives of Anglo-Jewry. I think Neville Lasky was then the president of the Board of Deputies. And the argument at the time was that fascism is a political activity, and Jews must not engage in special or separate political activity. We are concerned with anti-Semitism, but we can't fight fascism. We mustn't fight fascism. Fascism is something that's political, and we mustn't do it. We can do it in political organizations, but not as Jews. Well, we felt this was wrong. And so we decided that we ought to get a conference together, and we convened a conference, that is the Workers' Circle in the main, and the conference was held in the hall of the Grand Order Sons of Jacob, I think, in the Commercial Road. At this conference, the hall was crowded to the doors, and representatives appeared from a number of synagogues in the localities, and I think there were about 300 people present from all sorts of organizations, and they all felt the need to do something about it. And so was set up, in the late 30s, the Jewish People's Council. Remember, at this period, the Spanish Civil War had occurred. Members of the Workers' Circle had gone and joined the International Brigade in Spain, and several, in fact, were killed in the fighting in Spain against Franco-fascism. And this all helped to develop this ferment that was going on in East London. And out of this ferment, the Jewish People's Council was formed against fascism and anti-Semitism, And almost within days of its existence, we were informed that the fascists wanted to march through, were going to march through East London. Now, this is something which you all must know about. This famous October the 4th that occurred in East London, here, this battle with the police and the fascists in an attempt to prevent the black shirts from marching through East London. In the main, this was the work done by the Jewish People's Council, but it sprang from the Workers' Circle, which gave it its main support, which provided it with funds, and which gave it all the active young people who were necessary in the work that was undertaken at that time. And so we came up to the Second World War. Now, this was a second disaster for the Workers' Circle, because immediately the war occurred, like all other similar such organizations, there was a cessation of membership. No new members were taken in, because you must understand that it was prepared to meet any liabilities in respect of death benefits for members and others who might be killed during the period of the war, but we couldn't undertake extra responsibilities because a number of our members were in the army. They were no longer paying contributions, and we had to restrict the financial liability. This was a protective measure which we had to undertake, and it was one that we undertook with very great and deep regret. As a result of which, for a period of 5 years, there was a cessation of recruitment into the organization, as occurred in all Jewish organizations throughout the area. And as a result of the war itself, there was a complete dispersion of East London population. There's a relative handful of Jews left in East London. Remember those days, everybody lived within walking distance of the Workers' Circle in Ailey Street. I lived in Bethnal Green. In 10 minutes I could be at Ailey Street. And wherever a 10-minute throw from the circle would cover the most densely populated Jewish part of East London. But with the advent of the war, the Jewish people dispersed. There are larger numbers of people now in Hackney and in Stamford Hill than there are in East London. And it's of interest to note that there's the biggest concentration of Jewish people in North East London. That includes Stepney, Mile End, Hackney, Stoke Newington and Stamford Hill than any other part of Europe. This is the largest concentration of Jews in the whole of Europe. That is the price that the Jewish people paid for the war and the destruction of and the murder of the 6 million Jews in Europe. So that though one feels despondent about the fact that cultural life has reached a very low ebb, and that the inspiration to continue this kind of activity has almost disappeared, one must understand that the habits of people have changed, the thinking of people has changed, and in fact the social composition of the Jewish people has changed. It's true to say today that not anything like the same number of Jewish people are working people as they were 25 and 30 years ago. A lot more of them are now in the professions. The younger people don't go into business, they go into the professions, and they are moving further and further away from London. I went this morning to a sort of Pigeon Ben, almost in Heshishok. It's about 12 miles, 14 miles from the circle.